Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camp.
For decades, the world has placed its trust in international organizations such as USAID, the United Nations, NASA, NATO, and the World Health Organization, agencies that claim to promote health, security, aid, and progress. But behind the polished speeches and grand promises is a dark reality. These are wolves in sheep clothing.
Whether they like it or not, their agenda is under suspension.
Is climate change a reality, or is this a hoax? Is the world under attack because of this climate change? And is it being pushed by the globalists?
Ezekiel 22, verse 27. Her rulers in her are like wolves violently taking their food, putting men to death and causing the destruction of souls so that they may get their profit. The United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, a wolf in sheep's clothing, was created to provide humanitarian relief.
US aid is used as a weapon used by the deep state to control nations, to destroy governments, and prop up the globalist empire.
It was US aid that I fear much more than the CIA, because the US aid is how CIA gets shit done.
USAID is clearly in the job of trying to bring about regime change. It has secret bank accounts, shell companies.
USAID gets $50 billion a year.
At least now you know, if you didn't know before. USAID was not an organization for helping people. It was for destroying people. And they were paying journalists around the world for propaganda. They used them to tell lies and to maintain their lies. The so-called researches they were carrying out in many countries, no research at all. These are hideouts for wicked and evil atrocities to destroy these nations. And who's the mastermind behind USAID? Bill Gates.
I remember one of your advisors telling me years ago, whispering to me at dinner, that the U.S. government, the State Department, and agencies like USAID were working against you, funding your opposition indirectly, and really trying to subvert democracy in your country, and thinking, boys, can that be true? It turns out now it is true. And I wonder when the rest of us are going to get details on what exactly the State Department did to end democracy in Hungary.
You know, it's a taxpayer money.
Yes.
So if we take it, this whole thing, not as a political one, but rather as a moral issue. The fact is that the liberal elite of the West used the taxpayers' money of United States citizens to spread their ideology all around the world, and financed in Hungary more than 60 NGOs, paid politicians, media outlets, you know. So it was a plot against our sovereignty and independence.
They're responsible, just a moment, for bringing down governments that don't support their cause. The problem with their cause is it's evil. They have an evil cause.
Now, the average USAID worker may not realize it, but quite a few of them are also operatives who are underground, and their major agenda is to destabilize governments, destabilize countries. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education, where is the change? Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved. Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. The social services they're bringing, it's peanuts. The American taxpayer needs to know the billions of dollars that are being given to USAID, a fraction is making it to the people.
$10 million worth of USAID-funded meals, which went to an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group. $25 million for Deloitte to promote green transportation in the country of Georgia. $6 million for tourism in Egypt. What? Honestly, you know, here's the best thing you can do for tourism. Don't foment, an Arab Spring. That kind of stopped me from going to Egypt, Stop terrorism. That would be a good thing. $2.5 million to promote inclusion in Vietnam. $5 million to EcoHealth Alliance. Oh. One of the key NGOs funding bat virus research in the Wuhan lab.
They destroyed your currency, they destroyed your economy. See, they creep into the politics of the day and try to destroy the politicians. That's what they do. They don't care about you. They hate politicians that love their country. Once you love your country, you are an enemy.
The WHO is another wolf in sheep's clothing. Founded to protect global health, has been accused of favoring corporate interests over human lives. Big Pharma's influence dictates the WHO policies.
That's the World Health Organization. It's just another NGO. No one there was elected by anyone.
No, they are just nominated.
And then there are the vaccines.
Regular vaccines are known to be very dangerous and have severe side effects. The media hides that from you, from the public, at all costs. People express their unexpressible heartbreak that vaccines have caused their children who can no longer walk, can no longer speak, can no longer think. Their eyes are all over the place.
I think that what I know now is that the problems with vaccines in general and the MMR vaccine specifically are far greater than I had previously anticipated. Even as a physician and a scientist, I didn't question that, which I should have done. And when I started to question it around 1991, the further I looked into it, the more concerned I became. And when I presented questions to those in authority, I found that the answers were completely unsatisfactory.
And many continued to be deceived with the vaccines. And some have said, okay, now I can understand that the COVID vaccines might be a problem, but what about all other vaccines? I told you since 2020, there is no scientific evidence that any vaccine ever worked.
There were epidemics of paralysis that were occurring in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and they were predominantly occurring in children, but they were also occurring in adults. In fact, FDR, one of the most famous polio victims, or alleged polio victims, was, I believe, 40 years old when he contracted his paralysis. There was this paralysis that certainly was occurring, and nobody wants to deny that there was paralysis occurring. Respiratory muscles were paralyzed, limbs were paralyzed, and in children, that essentially meant that limb wouldn't grow normally and it would be small, like we see the pictures.
Some of the many reasons that people suffered from paralysis in the early 1900s was DDT, arsenic compounds. Arsenic was used in a newer neosalvarsan compound to treat many diseases, as was mercury, by the way. They're both neurotoxic. DDT is neurotoxic, but many other things can cause paralysis. Coxsackie virus, echoviruses, transverse myelitis, the list goes on. And in fact, the requirement to make a diagnosis of polio prior to the vaccine was just 24 hours of weakness or paralysis. Of course, the requirement changed. Once there was a vaccine, they wanted to show that paralysis and polio was reduced, and so the requirement became much more stringent. But prior to the commencement of the vaccination scheme. Diagnosis of polio was made, and it could have been many, many other things, including all the things I mentioned, plus more.
We know from historical documents that come either from history or from government bodies like the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, that have tracked these illnesses. And illnesses have spiked and been mostly gone by the time a vaccine was introduced, making the vaccine the hero when in fact the illness was mostly gone before the vaccine ever came on the horizon.
But I had to do my own research. It was God leading me and showing me the truth. There's no scientific evidence that any vaccine ever worked. It was a hoax from the beginning.
Reports of adverse reactions, neurological disorders, and unexplained deaths have surfaced across the globe. Yet the WHO dismisses concerns, downplays risks, and suppresses discussions. Families seeking justice are often met with silence.
Asked you, those who were championing reduction, drastic and massive reduction of population in the world, are these the people you want to produce a vaccine to save your life? Always remember that question.
There was a secret meeting by the top vaccine safety specialists from the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. This meeting was secret. It was not supposed to leak out. Someone with a conscience leaked out the footage of that meeting.
It's because we're not able to give clear-cut answers when people ask questions about the deaths that have occurred due to a particular vaccine.
And therefore it seems to me that it is not unexpected if they multiply the incidence of adverse reactions that are associated with the antigen but may not have been detected through lack of statistical power in the original studies.
You are correct. The major health concern which we are seeing are accusations of long-term effects. Long-term effects.
We have a very wobbly health professional frontline that is starting to question vaccines and the safety of vaccines.
Another organization disguised as a wolf in sheep's clothing is the United Nations. The United Nations presents itself as a force for peace. But behind closed doors, a corruption, sinister agendas, and bureaucratic incompetence, the United Nations has contributed to dramatic failures, often as a result of indecision and deliberate inaction, resulting in loss of lives.
On July the 11th, 1995, Serb forces occupied the Bosnian town of Srebrenica. Previously, the UN had declared it a safe area, and many Bosniak people had gathered there, expecting the blue flag of the United Nations to protect them. Unfortunately, words were not backed by actions. Only 400 Dutch peacekeepers were present, and they were under strict orders not to intervene.
The Dutch battalion were there to protect the people who lived there. They didn't. They should have done.
Questions too about why the atrocity had been allowed to happen. When Serb forces stormed Srebrenica, UN peacekeepers failed to fire a single shot.
The role of the Dutch commander Tom Karamanz is also controversial. Ratko Mladic plied the UN officer with gifts. Soon after, he orders his soldiers to execute thousands of Muslims. The Dutch peacekeepers helped the Serb forces to separate men and women. Thousands of unarmed Bosnian men were shot. Without knowing it, the peacekeepers became henchmen of Serbian mass murder. In 2007, the International Court of Justice classified the massacre of Srebrenica as genocide.
The extent of evil witnessed during the Rwandan genocide was largely possible due to deliberate inaction of the United Nations to save lives.
The term cockroach was used to dehumanize the Tutsis, and the radio was the Hutu government's biggest tool to incite hate. When Rwanda fell into the hands of Belgium after the First World War, they deliberately instrumentalized ethnicity to strengthen their hand and gain total control over the country. Tension and division was created among the majority Hutus and Tutsi minorities. As part of Belgium's divide and rule strategy, they adopted policies based on a play of power. By the mid-1960s, thousands were killed and more than half of the Tutsi population was said to have fled Rwanda, while the Hutus continued to consolidate power. Meanwhile, the other formal colonial powers also began exercising influence in the country, specifically France. On April 6, 1994, the Hutu president Juvenal Habyarimana was assassinated when his plane was shot down with surface-to-air missiles. This is when the brutal killings of innocent civilians began. Just imagine, around 2,000 people were killed in this church alone. At a time when international support was needed more than ever, the Belgium-backed UN peacekeeping mission, established to prevent civil war, reduced their foothold by almost 90% to just 270 men. The failure to protect the Tutsis from genocide not only played out on the ground in Rwanda, but also at the UN headquarters, where several cables were ignored. An example of this can be seen in the cable sent by General Romeo Dallaire, who led the UN peacekeeping mission at the time. Aggressive actions have been taken against the particular ethnic groups, against the general civilian population, and against UNAMIR, which has resulted in fatal and non-fatal casualties.
The United Nations was also conspicuously silent over the human rights abuses meted out in different nations during the COVID pandemic, has campaigned for harsh climate change policies, and has spearheaded the water control policy plan set to ration water, all geared towards the destruction of human lives.
Right now, we should understand by now that we do have an activist UN SecGen. Guterres is an activist. And this doesn't augur very well for the world, because these activists come in with certain agendas that got nothing to do with the welfare of nations. So these activists that we have in such organizations as the WHO and the United Nations, who are in connivance with several dictators and tyrants in Mufti, advocate the use of force wherever their narrative is opposed.
My name is Yvonne Katane. I'm the Philanthropy for International. My question to you is that has the United Nations really fulfilled its mandate in terms of fostering peace in the world and obviously looking at Africa? Because even President Trump withheld his contribution to the United Nations, citing that some of the NGOs and the work that is being done is not supporting what the United Nations is actually supposed to do. We recently found out that USAID was sponsoring terrorism. So has the United Nations actually done its part fully? And even with the vaccine agenda, it actually turned out to be a debacle. mRNA vaccines were killing people. Why didn't the United Nations actually advocate that it should have been stopped during the COVID-19 era? Thank you.
Obviously, we have a problem in the United Nations, and that problem is related to the geopolitical divides. And the geopolitical divides make the Security Council most times ineffective when we have serious crises.
So when I say that these are elitist kleptocrats, I'm telling you the exact truth, because nations have been robbed.
2, 1, 0, all engine running.
Another organization that has posed as a bastion of illumination and knowledge through questionable history is NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
President Eisenhower created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, a federal agency dedicated to space exploration. The US didn't want to fall behind the Soviets, who surprised everyone by launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite and man-made object, into Earth's orbit in 1957.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The questionable history of NASA leaves much to consider.
And I'm going to read you directly from this article because it's so unbelievable. My jaw was on the floor. It reads, quote, Jack Parsons is barely acknowledged on NASA's website, and he's the man who made rockets a reality and co-founded the agency's Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, home to missions which paved the way for the Apollo programs and continue to explore Mars and outer space today. In the desert lands outside of Caltech, there is a former river channel called Arroyo Seco. It is flanked on both sides by rock, one of which is called Devil's Gate. But years later, he would return to conduct ceremonies and rituals with other occultists in the same spot. By golly, guys, what then happens is that on Halloween of all nights in 1936, they have a scientific breakthrough. NASA would later consider that experiment, which happened again on Halloween, to be the first rocket experiment of what would later become the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
I said, one day I'm going to talk to you about what the Bible says about the Earth. Is the Earth actually spherical?
In 1969, NASA allegedly landed men on the moon using computers less powerful than a modern smartphone. Yet, over 50 years later, we still haven't returned to the moon. Was the moon landing a hoax of unquantifiable proportions?
So I asked NASA, as a journalist, I'm doing a documentary about the moon landings, which was true, and send me everything you got just from the first moon mission. So I meticulously went through everything, and there's very little footage. There's only like 20 pictures of an astronaut on the moon in the first mission. And you get the same footage over and over again. Well, my source at NASA believes a whistleblower sent me a tape. I pop it in, it says, do not show to the public on the screen. Okay, go ahead and play this. And this is the part that really gets you. You can dim down the audio if you want. So basically, this is the outtake. We have the unedited reel. That's why it said don't show to the public at the beginning. And here they are removing part of the transparency in front of the window and part of the special effect. That's a work light inside of the spacecraft. And then the lights come up and you see that they're in Earth orbit all the time. And we're using a 1-foot model of the Earth using the circular window to fake being halfway to the moon. So you see, that was the circular window the entire time. When I found the secret footage that night, I was followed from church. I ended up looping around and following the person following me, pulled up alongside of him to get a look at him, and apparently they zapped my car. All the electricity, everything just shut off automatically, and I coasted to a stop out in the middle of the highway at 9, 10 o'clock at night. I'm literally being chased on foot by 2 to 4 people. I hail a cab who takes me to a safe house where I have a copy of the tape. I get it to the back door of CNN, where I'm surrounded by government agents who take the tape. They drug me with what I presume is truth serum to the point of vomiting. They have a clipboard ready. They ask me all these questions like, where's the original and blah, blah, blah. I escape their custody. I make my way back to Nashville. I pee in a cup. I give it to a friend to put in his name in the lab, trying to outwit the CIA. And days later, when we meet to get the lab result, because I told the NBC News director, I'm going to get him. I got proof I got this exotic drug in me. You know what I mean? That they illegally injected me with. And so he says, well, there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, well, what problem? He says, well, funny thing, they had a break-in over the weekend. I'm like, yes, so what? He says, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. And the people at the lab are like, we don't know who you are, but take your business elsewhere.
The scripture says in Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur.
All such leaders are being brought, all those who dishonor the Lord dishonor the truth. WHO, the World Health Organization, and their globalist psychopaths, whether they like it or not, their agenda is under suspension.